What's going on, everybody? Cleepus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be revisiting the Samsung Galaxy A13 LTE and going over whether or not it's still a good phone to buy in late 2022. Now, on one hand, this phone really isn't that old. It came out in the spring of 2022, so only really like 6-7 months ago. But at the same time, since it was released, a lot of other phones have also come out at this point. So we're going to be taking another look at this phone and going over whether or not it's still a good option at this point. Now, before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to hit that subscribe button. And if you want to learn more about this phone, I will be linking to several other videos about it in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Samsung Galaxy A13 LTE, we're getting a 6.6-inch PLS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 400, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and an 83.2% screen-to-body ratio. So in general, especially for what it is, this phone has a really good display, and honestly, this is probably one of my favorite things about it. At 6.6 inches, it is definitely on the larger side, so if you're going to be consuming a lot of content, or you're just going to be on your phone a lot in general, you will get a pretty good experience here. Things, of course, are going to be larger and easier to see. With a 20:9 aspect ratio, we're getting a taller and more narrow form factor, and this is going to give you a more immersive experience in landscape mode. And if you're doing something vertical like browsing the web, using social media, stuff like that, you can also fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. Aside from the size and dimensions, for an entry-level phone like this, the image quality is really impressive too. With a 1080p resolution, things are going to be nice and sharp, the colors look really good, and for being a PLS LCD and not like an AMOLED or anything like that, the brightness and viewing angles are actually pretty decent too. So in general, if you're looking for more of a lower end sub $200 device, and maybe you're consuming a lot of content like videos for example, and you want to make sure you have a nice display, the Samsung Galaxy A13 is going to be a great choice. Now for storage, this phone is getting 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion. So on one hand, if you're really a power user, if you're downloading tons of apps and games and stuff like that, this is probably going to fill up relatively quickly. But that being said, for more of a lower end device, 64GB is honestly pretty impressive. For the average user, as long as you're mindful of what you're putting on your phone, and you make sure to use a microSD card whenever you can, 64GB should be perfectly fine for you. Now for security features, the Samsung Galaxy A13 does have Face Unlock, as well as a fingerprint scanner right here on the power key. Definitely a nice spot for a fingerprint scanner, but let's go ahead and give it a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So it did work decently well. And again, this phone does have Face Unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setup here, with the Samsung Galaxy A13, we got a water drop notch for the front facing camera. This camera is 8 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So in general, as far as features go, this phone has pretty much everything, including both an ultra wide camera and a macro camera. And honestly, for a phone in this price range, well, it's not really unheard of per se. It is a lot less common because most lower end phones have either an ultra wide camera or a macro camera, and they don't always have both. And with a 50 megapixel camera, you can expect to get pretty good photo quality here. So in general, while the photos you can take with this phone are not going to be nearly as good as something like a $1,000 flagship phone, for example, for a really entry level phone, I would say the photo quality is pretty impressive. For most people, if you're taking casual photos here and there, maybe to share on social media, for example, then in general, this phone will get the job done. Now that being said, if you want to see a more detailed review of the camera, definitely check out my full camera review for this phone, which I will be linking to in the video description. But again, in general, for what it is, I honestly think the Samsung Galaxy A13 LTE has one of the best cameras in its price range. Now when it comes to RAM and processor, the Samsung Galaxy A13 is getting 4GB of RAM with the Exynos 850 processor. Now honestly, while this phone does have a lot going for it for what it is, the performance is really one of the biggest weaknesses here. With this phone, on one hand, if you're just streaming videos here and there, doing some light web browsing and social media and stuff like that, and really not a whole lot else, it will at least get the job done. I mean, it's not terrible, but at the same time, keep in mind, this phone is really not fast at all. And if you get a device like this, expecting really good performance, you are going to be disappointed, especially if you're really just going to be on your phone all day, because in that case, you will notice it is pretty slow. That being said though, I did run a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on it, and here's what I got. What I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of where this phone stands compared to your current device. But in general, I would say, unless your current device is either really low end or maybe a little bit older, chances are this phone is probably not going to be a performance upgrade. That being said though, if you're really just looking for something for basic activities and you're not really going to be doing a whole lot on it, then I would say despite this phone having pretty slow performance, for the more basic activities, it will get the job done. Now as far as the battery goes, the Samsung Galaxy A13 LTE, like almost every Samsung Galaxy A series phone in 2022, does have a 5000 mAh battery, and it also supports 15-watt fast charging. So with a 5000 mAh battery, you can expect to get great battery life and longevity here. So if you're in a situation where maybe you're not always around a charger, but you need something that's really going to last all day, the A13 is definitely going to be a great choice for that. And with 15-watt fast charging charging, while on one hand, this is definitely not the best fast charging in the world, for what it is, it's definitely acceptable, and in my experience, the charging speeds you get with this phone are pretty decent. Another thing I do want to point out here, and chances are you probably weren't expecting this anyway, but the Samsung Galaxy A13 LTE, like every Samsung Galaxy A series phone, does not have wireless charging, so if you do really want that feature, in order to get it, you are going to have to get something much higher end. As far as the software goes, as of right this second, this phone currently has Android 12, but it is going to be getting Android 13 real soon, and in addition to this, with Samsung software support, you can also expect to get several other major updates as well. So if it's important to you to have a newer version of Android, then this phone, or honestly any new Samsung phone, is going to be a great choice. In addition to this, with the Samsung Galaxy A13 LTE, unfortunately this phone does not have NFC, so if you like to make contactless mobile payments using tap and pay, then keep in mind unfortunately you won't be able to do that with this phone. Now that being said, I do know the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G does have NFC, and I did also hear there is another version of this phone out there somewhere that also does have NFC. Now I'm not 100% sure if that's actually true or not, but if you do have a version of the Samsung Galaxy A13 LTE that does have NFC, definitely let me know in the comments, because as you can see, this phone in my hand does not have NFC. But in general, if you are in the US and you really want a phone that has NFC, then I would suggest getting something like the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G or the A23 5G instead. But in conclusion, is the Samsung Galaxy A13 LTE still worth buying in late 2022? In general, despite it maybe not being the most impressive phone in several different ways, I do think this phone actually has quite a bit going for it that definitely makes it worth buying in certain situations. First of all, for an entry-level phone, this is honestly one of the best displays you're going to find in this price range. It's not often we see a phone like this that has a 1080p resolution, and in addition to this, the size and dimensions are also really good, so if you're just going to be consuming a lot of content like watching videos for example, and you're really not doing a whole lot else, the A13 is going to be a good phone for that. We're also getting pretty decent storage here, a nice camera, a large battery that also has decent fast charging, and really good software support. So in general, if you're more of a light user, and you're looking for an entry-level phone for basic activities, but you also want a good display, good storage, and a nice camera, and you're not really too concerned about performance, in that kind of situation, the Samsung Galaxy A13 LTE is still definitely worth considering. Now once again, if you want to learn more about this phone, I will be linking to several other videos about it in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.